is KBS World Radio, the overseas service of the Korean Broadcasting System, coming to you from Seoul, the capital of the Republic of Korea. We now begin today's English broadcast on KBS World Radio.
From Seoul, Korea, KBS World Radio News Today starts right now.
On today's broadcast, President Moon Jae-in proposes transforming the demilitarized zone dividing the two Koreas into a peace zone by establishing UN agencies in the area. South Korea strengthens quarantine efforts after confirming a fifth case of African swine fever. And a trial begins for Samsung Biologics executives indicted on allegations of destroying evidence related to accounting fraud. This is KBS World Radio News. I'm Arias Dare. President Moon Jae-in has proposed turning the heavily fortified demilitarized zone dividing the two Koreas into a territory of peace. He says by hosting various UN agencies, the DMZ peace zone would guarantee safety for North Korea as well as bring lasting peace to South Korea. Kim Bum-soo has this report.
한반도의 허리를 가로지르는 비무장 지대를
President Moon Jae-in has proposed transforming the demilitarized zone, or DMZ, dividing the two Koreas into an international peace zone.
If we designate the area connecting Panmunjom and Kaesong in North Korea as a peace and cooperation district and transform it into a zone where both Koreas and the international community can jointly explore the path to prosperity on the Korean Peninsula. And if the DMZ comes to house UN offices already stationed in the two Koreas and other international organizations related to peace, ecology, and culture, and emerge as a center for research on peace, peacekeeping, arms control, and trust building, it can become an international peace zone in name as well as substance.
During his speech at the UN General Assembly on Tuesday, the South Korean president introduced his blueprint for peace on the Korean Peninsula, reaffirming zero tolerance for war as an underlying principle.
Once peace is established between the two Koreas, I will work together with North Korea to inscribe the DMZ as a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
The two Koreas are still technically at war, as the North and the UN in 1953 only signed an armistice agreement. Serving as a buffer zone between the two Koreas, the 4-kilometer-wide demilitarized zone spanning east to west across the peninsula has ironically become a pristine green zone. On the sidelines of the UN gathering, Moon and U.S. President Donald Trump held bilateral talks just a day earlier, sharing ways to produce practical outcomes from the U.S.-North Korea dialogue. Kim Bum-soo, KBS World Radio News.
President Moon Jae-in on Tuesday reaffirmed that South Korea will push forward with a plan to field unified teams with North Korea at the 2020 Summer Olympics in Tokyo. In a meeting with International Olympic Committee, or IOC President Thomas Bach in New York, Moon also confirmed his government would seek a joint bid with North Korea to host the 2032 Olympic Games. Moon said that South Korea is also considering a joint bid with North Korea to host the 2024 Winter Youth Olympics as part of preparations to host the 2032 Olympics. U.S. President Donald Trump said on Tuesday that North Korea must denuclearize in order to tap its, quote, tremendous economic potential. Trump made the remarks in a speech at the UN General Assembly in New York ahead of the presumed resumption of working-level talks between Washington and Pyongyang. Park Jong-hong has the details.
Many of America's closest friends today were once our greatest foes.
Speaking at the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York on Tuesday, Trump touted his administration's bold diplomacy on the Korean Peninsula as part of Washington's pursuit of peace.
Only the most courageous can choose peace. For this same reason, we have pursued bold diplomacy on the Korean Peninsula. I have told Kim Jong-un what I truly believe, that like Iran, his country is full of tremendous untapped potential, but that to realize that promise, North Korea must denuclearize.
As Washington and Pyongyang prepare to resume working-level negotiations, Trump has suggested that a new method could help break the standstill between the two, but has been cautious about revealing details. The U.S. president has also said he could meet Kim again, although this would likely only occur if and when progress is made at working-level talks. Park Jong-hong, KBS World Radio News.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is reportedly planning a trip to China to mark the 70th anniversary of the two countries' diplomatic relations next month. KBS learned from diplomatic sources on Tuesday that Kim will likely visit Beijing before or after October 6th, the day of the anniversary. The visit, if realized, will be Kim's fifth since March of last year, and this year's second following his previous visit in January. 3 pig farms near the border with North Korea reported suspected cases of African swine fever, or ASF, on Wednesday, after a 5th case of the deadly animal disease was confirmed the previous day. If all are confirmed, South Korea will mark 8 ASF cases in just over a week. Authorities have expanded quarantine and disinfection operations to try and prevent a nationwide outbreak. Bae Ju-yeon has the latest.
The Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs ordered a 48-hour standstill on all pig farms and feed factories around the country starting at noon on Tuesday. Areas subject to strict quarantine measures were also expanded to stem the further spread of African swine fever to include all of Gyeonggi Province, Incheon, and nearby Gangwon Province. For the next 3 weeks, pig and livestock excretions will not be allowed to be transported out of the affected areas, and checkpoints will operate around the clock. The ministry also plans to conduct a massive disinfection operation on roads and near rivers located in northern Gyeonggi Province near the inter-Korean border, where most of the ASF cases have been confirmed. Quarantine officials are conducting inspections of pig farms and livestock facilities in over 150 cities and counties to ensure proper sterilization is taking place. As of Tuesday morning, more than 20,000 pigs had been culled at infected farms in Gyeonggi Province. An additional 30,000 are set to be slaughtered in the coming days. The North Chungcheong provincial government has also restricted movement to and from farms in the counties of Eumseong and Sincheon until October 10th and 12th respectively, after a vehicle that visited one of the infected farms was found to have traveled to the region. Although ASF does not affect people, it is highly contagious and fatal for pigs, with no cure currently available. The disease is mainly spread by contaminated feed or through direct contact with people and wild animals with the virus. The South Korean government has yet to determine the cause of the latest outbreak. Bae Ju-yeon, KBS World Radio News.
A hearing was held on Wednesday for Samsung executives suspected of destroying evidence related to Samsung Biologics' alleged accounting fraud. A total of 8 Samsung Electronics executives are being tried on charges of forgery and destruction of evidence at the Seoul Central District Court. The defendants are suspected to have been involved in destruction or concealment of documents concerning the alleged accounting fraud at Samsung Biologics and its affiliate, Samsung Bioepis. Prosecutors believe that the alleged accounting fraud was to facilitate the merger between JL Industries and Samsung C&T, which ultimately helped Samsung Group heir Lee Jae-young overhaul the group's governance structure. The prosecution on Tuesday summoned and questioned the son of Justice Minister Cho Guk on allegations of document forgery. The Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office reportedly grilled the minister's son over an internship certificate received in 2017 from the Seoul National University Center for Public Interests and Human Rights Law following a 2013 high school internship. The prosecution suspects the certificate may have been forged. The benchmark Korea Composite Stock Price Index lost 27.65 points, or 1.32% on Wednesday. It ended the day at 2,073.39. The tech-heavy Kosdaq also fell, losing 15.09 points, or 2.35%, to close at 626.76 points. On the foreign exchange, the local currency weakened 3.1 won against the dollar, ending the session at 1,198.8 won. And that's the news from KBS World Radio's News Center in Seoul. I'm Arias Dare.
Wednesday, the 25th of September. Thank you for joining us here on Korea 24. I'm your host, Kwon Jang-woo. Addressing the United Nations General Assembly, President Moon Jae-in has proposed transforming the demilitarized zone dividing the two Koreas into an international peace zone. We'll have more on this in our news briefing. South Korea's finance minister has said the nation's status as a developing nation in the World Trade Organization needs to be reviewed. We'll look closer at what this might mean in our in-depth news analysis. And later on Korea Book Club, we'll be discussing a timely book that introduces children to the past, present and future of plastics. Let's begin Korea
24. To welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Moon Jae-in, President of the Republic of Korea, and invite him to make an address to the Assembly. You have the floor, Your Excellency.
유엔과 회원국들의 흥신으로 세계의 많은 문제들이 해결되고
That was President Moon Jae-in starting his speech in front of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. He introduced his blueprint for peace on the Korean Peninsula, and he reaffirmed zero tolerance for war as an underlying principle, while also highlighting future prospects for the buffer zone between the two Koreas. Let's take a further listen to his speech.
If we designate the area connecting Panmunjom and Kaesong in North Korea as a peace and cooperation district and transform it into a zone where both Korea and the international community can jointly explore the path to prosperity on the Korean Peninsula. And if the DMZ comes to house UN offices already stationed in the two Koreas and other international organizations related to peace, ecology and culture, and emerge as a center for research on peace, peacekeeping, arms control, and trust building, it can become an international peace zone in name as well as substance.
For more details on this story, as well as the other headlines of the day, we have Rosine Park from the KBS World Radio News Center joining us now. Hi, Rosine.
Hello, Jang-woo.
So we heard a little bit from that speech, and he introduced the idea of a peace zone. Can you tell us more about that?
As we heard, he talked about turning the heavily fortified DMZ into an international peace zone, and as part of the plan, house various UN agencies there. He believes the move could guarantee safety for North Korea and bring lasting peace to South Korea. That's by way of positively influencing the North to denuclearize. He also mentioned that the DMZ has become a symbolic space steeped in history, which embraces both tragedy of division as embodied by the joint security area guard posts and barbed wire fences, as well as a yearning for peace. He said it's a common heritage of humankind and its value must be shared with the whole world. Once peace is established between the two Koreas, he said he'll work together with North Korea to inscribe the DMZ as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Now, the 4-kilometer wide buffer zone that spans east to west across the peninsula has also become a pristine green space over the decades since it became a buffer zone following the signing of the 1953 Armistice Agreement. And there has been prior talk about transforming it, especially among conservationists, but there's the issue of the hundreds of thousands of landmines planted in the DMZ, which Seoul believes could take up to 15 years to remove, if not more. On that, Moon also asked the UN to help with the cleanup work. He highlighted his peace economy initiative as well with North Korea, which envisions both Koreas jointly contributing to economic development in East Asia.
In line with his peace plan, President Moon met with the International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach, and he reaffirmed South Korea will push forward with efforts to field unified teams with North Korea at the 2020 Summer Olympics in Tokyo.
Yes, Moon and Bach held talks on the sidelines of the UN sessions in New York on Tuesday, and Moon indicated that Seoul has not given up on hopes for inter-Korean teams next year, and also confirmed that his administration still wants to seek a joint bid with North Korea to host the 2032 Olympic Games. He also said a joint bid with the North to host the 2024 Winter Youth Olympics was being considered as part of preparations. Bach has been very supportive of inter-Korean cooperation on the Olympic stage, and for that, Moon expressed his gratitude. continued. Despite escalating trade and historical related tensions between South Korea and Japan, meanwhile, Moon conveyed hopes for a safe and peaceful Tokyo Olympics, as well as for the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing, to, of course, promote peace and prosperity in Northeast Asia.
Moon's peace plan sounds positive, but perhaps quite doesn't fit the current mood, given the freeze in inter-Korean cooperation, as well as the prolonged stall in denuclearization talks between the North and the U.S.
Yeah, U.S. President Donald Trump also stood in front of the UN General Assembly Tuesday, and during his speech, he said North Korea must denuclearize in order to tap into its, quote, tremendous economic potential. He also said the U.S. doesn't believe in permanent enemies and that America wants partners, not adversaries around the world. We have a clip of him speaking. Let's take a listen.
Only the most courageous can choose peace. For this same reason, we have pursued bold diplomacy on the Korean Peninsula. I have told Kim Jong-un what I truly believe, that like Iran, his country is full of tremendous untapped potential, but that to realize that promise, North Korea must denuclearize. Around the world, our message.
Now, his remarks come as Washington and Pyongyang are expected to resume working-level negotiations in the coming weeks.
Amid all this, there's speculation that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is planning a trip to China next month to mark the 70th anniversary of the two Koreas' diplomatic relations.
Yes, KBS has learned from diplomatic sources that Kim will likely visit Beijing before or after October 6th. That's the day of the anniversary. If realized, it would be his second visit this year and fifth overall since March of last year. There's also the possibility of him meeting again with Chinese President Xi Jinping, which could be highly symbolic and timely given the situation with denuclearization talks and the ongoing trade war between the U.S. and China. Xi and Kim may look to further deepen Beijing-Pyongyang ties in celebration of their diplomatic anniversary and seek ways to reinforce cooperation. Now, South Korea's State Intelligence Agency also told a parliamentary committee recently that it's possible Kim could visit Beijing or China's three northeastern provinces around that date of October 6th.
Let's turn now to the latest in the African swine fever outbreak. It's been almost 10 days now since South Korea confirmed its first case, and nearly every day since then there have been new confirmed cases and suspected reports. The fear is that outbreaks will spread from the northern provinces to other regions across the country. Where are government quarantine measures at right now?
Well, the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs ordered a 48-hour standstill on all pig farms and feed factories around the country. That started at noon Tuesday. Areas subject to strict quarantine measures were also expanded to stem the further spread of ASF to include all of Gyeonggi Province, Incheon, and as well as Gangwon Province. So far, ASF has only hit farms in these areas. For the next 3 weeks, pig and livestock excretions will not be allowed to be transported out of the affected areas, and checkpoints will operate around the clock. Meanwhile, massive disinfection operations will continue on roads and near rivers located in northern Gyeonggi Province near the inter-Korean border. Quarantine officials are also conducting inspections of pig farms and livestock facilities in over 150 cities and counties. That's to ensure proper sterilization procedures are being strictly followed. Now, ASF doesn't affect people, but it's highly contagious and fatal for pigs and is mainly spread by contaminated feed or through direct contact with people or wild animals with the ASF virus. In terms of culling, that tally is expected to breach 50,000 in the coming days.
That's where we'll leave our news briefing for today. Thank you for those updates, Rosine.
Thank you.
Coming up next, in-depth news analysis. You're listening to Korea 24 from KBS World Radio.
Last week, Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi said that South Korea needs to fundamentally review whether it can maintain its status as a developing nation in the World Trade Organization. Since 1995, South Korea has been maintaining its developing country status, primarily to protect the nation's sensitive agriculture industry, especially rice. However, U.S. President Donald Trump recently called for WTO reform, saying the trade body's rules have allowed relatively advanced countries to receive favorable treatment by identifying as a developing nation. To further explain this label and where Korea goes from here, we're now joined on the line by Professor Lee Hyo-young at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Welcome to the program, Professor Lee.
Yes, thank you.
So can you start us off, Professor, for our listeners by giving us some background on South Korea's developing country status at the WTO and the benefits that South Korea enjoys?
Yes, as you mentioned, Korea obtained the developing country status during the Uruguay round negotiations in the mid-1990s, which resulted in the launch of the WTO as we know it today. And during the negotiations, we made a strong claim about the vulnerability of our agricultural sector, and we succeeded in obtaining the benefits that come with the developing country status. The benefits that developing countries enjoy are actually various under the WTO rules. There are about 150 or more types of benefits that are provided to less developed countries, such as special and differential treatment or the GSP, the Generalized System of Preferences. This is to help the less developed country members to better enjoy the benefits of trade liberalization through so-called flexibilities in the application of WTO rules. For South Korea, we only apply the developing country status to agricultural negotiations and not to other non-agricultural sectors. This is because even when we first obtained the status, there were some difficulties. Because soon after we obtained the developing country status, Korea became a member of the OECD, the Rich Countries Club, which made several other export-oriented members in the WTO claim that Korea can no longer be considered a developing country. And the benefits that Korea enjoys include, firstly, slower tariff reduction schedule for agricultural goods as compared to developed country members, which is about two-thirds of the level of obligation for developed country members. And secondly, developing countries are allowed to use special safeguard measures in case of sudden increase in agricultural imports due to tariff reductions, which Korea is also subject to. And thirdly, for rice, Korea applies a tariff rate of 513% as a developing country, and being able to classify rice as a special product. And lastly, developing countries are also allowed a slower reduction in agricultural subsidies, which is 30% reduction over a period of 8 years as compared to a 45% reduction over 5 years for developed countries.
So South Korea are receiving some of these benefits, but then how is a nation given this status as a developing country, and in turn, what is the process to relinquish it?
It is a self-declaration basis approach. So in other words, the WTO allows member countries to obtain developing country status on a self-declaration basis, meaning that countries can self-declare themselves developing countries without any requirement to meet any criteria. So therefore, relinquishing the developing country status also merely requires self-declaration that it will no longer obtain the benefits as a developing country in present or future negotiations.
Right, so it's up to South Korea. The other nations can't, for example, kick us out as being a developing nation.
Yes, basically.
So if South Korea gives up its developing nation status at the WTO, then what potential impact will it have on the country? You talked about the agriculture sector that it was protecting. How will it change?
Yes, our agriculture industry will inevitably face significant challenges due to the change in status. The benefits that we have enjoyed so far in the agricultural sector will be reduced to the level of developed country members, such as the rice tariffs, which may be reduced from the current 513% to about 393% when classified as a sensitive product. And also, the level of obligation to reduce agricultural subsidies would be tightened, implying changes to the current rice subsidy system that the Korean government provides to its rice farmers. However, such changes in treatment are not expected to be automatic after a renewed declaration has been made, because there's still room for negotiations on whether the change in the status applies after the current DDA, the Doha Round agricultural negotiations, are completed. This is a point where the U.S. and Korea may disagree, but our government's position seems to be that the change in status in agricultural negotiations only applies to future negotiations, and therefore Korea maintains its developing country status until the current negotiations are completed.
All right, you mentioned the U.S. there. Let's bring that side of the equation here, because in July, the United States put pressure on the WTO, giving the group a 90-day ultimatum to change how it designates developing countries. Now, without progress in those 90 days, the Trump administration said it will no longer treat countries that it did not consider to be developing nations as such, and reject its membership in the OECD. The U.S. has proposed to the WTO to strip countries of their developing country status if they meet certain criteria. Can you outline what those criteria are?
Yes, the U.S. has actually proposed 4 criteria for deciding whether a WTO member country belongs to the category of developing country. And those are, first, whether you are a member of the OECD or going through the process of becoming an OECD member. And secondly, whether you are a G20 country. Thirdly, whether you are classified as a high-income country by the World Bank. And fourthly, whether you export more than 0.5% of world trade volumes. And in fact, Korea belongs to all 4 of these criteria. It is actually the only country among WTO members which currently applies to developing country status that fall under all the 4 criteria. And other countries like Turkey, Mexico, and Saudi Arabia belong to 3 of these 4 criteria. And China belongs to 2 of the 4 criteria. And Brazil, Taiwan, and UAE, which fall under 2 criteria, actually have already decided to give up their developing country status.
You mentioned various countries there that meet or don't meet the criteria, but actually we should be talking about China, because Trump has admitted as much that his push to change these rules is because of China. China is also, as you said, labeled as a developing country and receiving benefits from the WTO, which the U.S. president is saying is unfair. Professor, my question to you is, perhaps does he have a point? How big a benefit do these countries labeled as developing nations get?
Yes, I think that Trump does have a point on labeling China as unfit for classifying itself as a developing country. But according to the 4 criteria that the U.S. has proposed, China only belongs to 2 of the 4 criteria. So maybe China does have a point there. But Trump also mentions that if you belong to any one of the 4 criteria, it can be stripped of its developing country status. So I think it all depends on what Trump does in bilateral negotiations with these developing countries, including China and Korea as well.
Let's go back to South Korea, because South Korea does meet all 4 of the criteria. What can the United States do if South Korea keeps its status as a developing country? Would perhaps the Trump administration find some way to retaliate?
Currently, there are 2 tracks which I think will happen. There will be multilateral negotiations on changing the current rules on developing country status. However, these discussions on changing the rules regarding the developing country status within the WTO are not expected to come up with an agreement soon, because, as you know, the multilateral negotiations are in a stalemate situation. And in particular, China and other developing countries are very strongly opposed to the adoption of such a criteria for classifying the developing country members. On the other hand, it is also likely that the U.S. may decide to raise this issue in more bilateral settings and pressure the negotiating partners into giving up their developing country status. As you have already mentioned in the beginning, President Trump has already proclaimed that the U.S. may unilaterally not provide benefits commensurate to developing countries in bilateral relations. So this is likely that Trump may raise this issue in bilateral negotiations with China and also Korea if he decides to do so in the future.
Right, so this could become a bit of a sore point with President Trump going forward. But then, Professor, what should South Korea be looking to do now, looking ahead? Is there perhaps any advice that you would give to the South Korean government as to whether to keep or drop this developing nation status?
In fact, Korea has long been subject to this debate of whether to maintain its developing country status since the very first time it obtained the status in the 1990s. Because Korea, as I mentioned previously, became a member of the OECD right after the Uruguay round was concluded, and there was a lot of criticism over Korea enjoying the benefits as a developing country when it was performing so well in global trade and economic growth. And also, the decision to delay the rice tariffication in 2004 for 10 more years made Korea subject to mandatory rice import quotas, which was a burden for the Korean government. And the resulting excessive production in rice led the government to provide subsidies for rice farmers, which has also been a financial burden to the government for quite a long time. So I think that the recent move by the government to reconsider this issue in a more proactive way is rather a step in the right direction, which I think previous governments have not been able to take on. So I hope that our government will be able to use this new stance strategically in future negotiations, not only in multilateral settings, but also in bilateral settings, possibly with the U.S. as well.
We've been speaking to Professor Lee Hoo-young at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy about South Korea's developing nation status in the WTO. Thank you for your time today, Professor.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to the Korea 24 Stock and Forex Update. The benchmark Korea Composite Stock Price Index lost 27.65 points, or 1.32% on Wednesday. It ended the day at 2,073.39. The tech-heavy Kosdaq also fell, losing 15.09 points, or 2.35%, to close at 626.76 points. On the foreign exchange, the local currency weakened 3.1 won against the dollar, ending the session at 1,198.8 won. You can check Korean stock and forex closings at world.kbs.co.kr.
Right, let's carry on now to our daily feature, Korea Trending. This is where we bring you some of the other news stories that have been trending locally here in Korea. And for that, we welcome Mark Broom back to the studio. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Jango. For trending topics, we're going to talk about a college expressing its intent to close its doors. We'll also get details about some top and very well-known, in fact, gold medal winning at the Olympics, South Korean archers failing to qualify for the next Summer Olympics in Tokyo next year. And then finally we'll learn how more than 40,000 people in South Korea continue to suffer from scabies every year.
Well, we start with that first story. It's not every day that we see a university closing down, is it?
No, it isn't, but apparently it might be more of a regular occurrence in the future, especially with the declining youth population. But the Dongbusan College in the southeastern city of Busan, about 325 kilometers south of Seoul, was being searched for widely as it is pursuing a voluntary closure or merging with another school due to financial troubles. The announcement on Wednesday comes a month after the school had unveiled that it would not be recruiting new students for 2020. The college, which provides 2-year and 3-year degree programs, recently submitted to the Education Ministry its intent to close down, citing that 75% of their teaching staff supported ceasing operations.
Now, this college, it made headlines back in 2015 when the Chief Director and Secretary General of the school's foundation were fired for having embezzled billions of won from the foundation.
That's absolutely correct. In response to the college's intent for voluntary closure, the Education Ministry said that legal procedures must be met, including making up for the money that was embezzled by the foundation's officials. The college's teaching staff saw their wages slashed by 30% for a period of time. Currently, the employees have been unable to receive any pay from the school. About 30 teachers have left the school via voluntary retirement, while former and incumbent teachers have filed a suit against the school's foundation for the non-payment of wages.
Right, and the school apparently is having other financial troubles due to moves imposed by the Education Ministry as well.
Yeah, the school's financial issues got even worse when the Education Ministry fully limited providing national scholarships and student loans to the college both this and last year. Established back in 1978, Dongbusan College has 21 departments, and as of 2018 there were just under 1,700 students enrolled in the school.
So it looks like the writings have been on the wall for Dongbusan for a while now. I feel bad for all the students and the teachers that were working there or not involved in any scandals at all, and hope they can find their feet going forward.
Yeah.
Let's move on now to our second trending topic for the day. What do you have for us?
Yeah, archery matches. South Korea is famous for being very good at archery, but the topic was heating up the web after some of South Korea's biggest names in the sport failed to make the national team. The second round of matches for selecting members of the 2020 national team for the Tokyo Olympics was held in Yecheon, North Gyeongsang Province on Tuesday. In order to qualify for the third round of matches, the archers had to finish within the top 20.
Yes, as you said, South Korea has an unrivaled record, shall we say, in Olympic archery, especially the women. Korean women have won gold in every archery event bar one since 1984. That includes both single and team events. That's quite incredible record. But with that in mind, which prominent archers failed to make the cut for their national team?
Well, if you remember the last Olympics in Rio, you'll probably recognize some of these names. Jang Hae-jin, she won 2 gold medals in Rio, failed to be selected after she came in 22nd place. As a result, she will not be able to compete in Tokyo next July. In addition, Gi Bo-bae, who won medals at the 2012 and 2016 Summer Olympics, also didn't make the cut. There's a saying that passing the selection process for the national archery team is harder than winning a medal at the Olympics, just because there are so many great archers here. Up until last year, archers on the national team did not have to compete in the first and second round of selection matches. They kind of got to buy into the later rounds. They only had to play in the third and final round, but that has changed now.
Well, how come the Korean Archery Association changed the rules like this?
Well, the association made the change in the selection process in a bid to select the world's best archers through tough competition and to maintain its position as top dog in the sport, essentially. The final round of selection matches will be held early next year. As you touched upon, Jang-o, South Korea, since it first participated in the Olympics, has won a staggering 39 medals in archery, and that's the most of any country in the entire world.
Right, so no mercy, even if you have won an Olympic gold before for the South Korean national team. And those are certainly ominous signs for Korea's opponents at next year's Olympics. I'm sure there'll be some new Korean archery stars are coming up, though, in Tokyo. Finally, we end with a health-related story. Can you tell us more about this scabies scare?
Yeah, it's not often you hear about scabies these days, but it's trending widely as a research team found that more than 40,000 people in South Korea continue to suffer from the highly contagious parasitic infestation every year. A research team at Songyungwan University's School of Medicine said Wednesday that it found that the number of scabies patients begins to surge in the summer and peak during the fall before slipping in the winter. In the fall of 2017, the number of scabies patients reached around 6,000, or 1.5 times more than the amount of patients seen during the spring. The number of scabies patients in South Korea had slipped from 2010 to 2015, but it slowly began to pick up again in 2016.
Right, it makes my skin crawl just talking about this kind of story, but I'm afraid to ask this next question. What are some of the symptoms of scabies?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like a condition that used to be quite common back in the day, perhaps when people were taking wooden ships across the ocean. But according to the World Health Organization, what it essentially is you have these microscopic scabies mites, and they burrow into the skin and lay eggs. Yeah. And it triggers an immune response that leads to intense itching and rashes. The organization says scabies infestations may be complicated by bacterial infections leading to the development of skin sores, which can be extremely painful indeed, and they can even result in heart disease and chronic kidney disease.
So why are cases of scabies on the rise in Korea at the moment?
Well, the research team said one of the main reasons is due to the increase in the number of geriatric facilities. People often catch scabies from hospitals or geriatric facilities via skin-to-skin contact. The team said that while such facilities are increasing, their ability to control the spread of the contagious skin infestation is lacking.
So what steps should one take if they are infected by scabies?
Well, if a patient at a hospital gets scabies, the hospital should swiftly quarantine the patient and have other patients who share the same room undergo treatment for a day or two. The infected patient's undergarments and bedclothes need to be promptly washed and disinfected by sunlight, while the patient needs to apply lotion or ointment early on to avoid any of these further complications, these secondary infections.
Right, so as in many cases, good hygiene is the key. And I'm glad to say we don't have to talk about it anymore because we have to end the Korea Trending there. Thank you for those stories, Mark, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Regular Wednesday segment, Korea Book Club. Here we delve into the world of Korean literature by introducing you to notable Korean works that have been translated into the English language. And for this, we have our literary critic, Barry Welsh, joining me now in the studio. Hi, Barry. Hope you've been well.
Yes, I'm very well, thank you. I hope you've been good too.
Yes, I've been great, thank you. So I understand this week you have a children's book for us to look at.
Yes, that's right. So something a little bit different for us today. We have a non-fiction children's book, a picture book, and it's called Plastic, Past, Present and Future, and it was written by Kim Eun-ju and illustrated by E.G. Won and translated by Lee Chong-min.
Right, Plastic, Past, Present and Future. I understand the Korean title was originally Silka Malka.
Yes,
right,
Silka Malka Plastic, so which I guess is should I or shouldn't I use plastic, right?
Right.
Basically, right. So Kim Eun-ju, who's the main writer on the project, she's been writing children's books for a long time and studied physics and early childhood education in college, and so there's a mixture of a bit of both of those things in this book. You can see her background in the book, certainly, and it's technically recommended for ages 5 to 12, but I'm sure there's lots of people like older children like myself that get something out of this book. And it's essentially about the life cycle of plastic, which we all know it's a very topical issue at the moment. The world consumes several 100 million tons of plastic every year, and single-use plastics have become a very important issue that's been talked about in a lot of different places. And this is a beautifully designed book. It looks beautiful, and it explains when and why we started using plastic. And to do so, it uses a very clever framing device to introduce the topic and explain the life cycle. And it also tackles a variety of different plastic-related issues, so how plastic is produced, the various ways that we've used plastic over the last century, and even suggests some possible solutions or things that we can do to improve our use of plastic in the future. Now, it was originally published in Korea in 2017, just translated into English and published in the UK just last month. I had to order my copy from the English version from an online bookstore. And English translation is published by Scribble Books, who also have some excellent teacher resources available on their website to go with the book.
Right, as you said, it's a very timely book. This issue obviously affects everyone in the world, and I wish I had something like this when I was younger as well.
Right.
To help me understand more about plastics. You mentioned that there was a clever framing device used by the writer to explore this topic. What do you mean by that?
Right, so it's the night time in January 10th, 1992. There's a heavy storm raging in the Pacific Ocean, the western Pacific Ocean, and the Evergreen cargo ship is traveling through the storm, and it's battered by strong high waves as it encounters the storm, and containers on the ship were rocked about, and they collided with each other, and several fell overboard, and some of them burst open, and they released around 28,000 plastic bath toys into the ocean. And around 10 months later, some of these bath toys, like ducks and frogs and turtles, they started washing up in Alaska, on the beaches of Alaska in USA, and they traveled thousands of miles to end up there, and still now, around 27 years later, some of these toys are still turning up in places all over the world. So some ended up trapped in Arctic ice, some washed up in my neighbourhood in Scotland, and many washed up in America, on the western coast of America. And the book asks the question of how, after travelling across the ocean and through all kinds of weather for thousands of miles and sometimes for years, how did these toys stay so fresh and often physically unchanged?
Right, so it's not just a book listing like boring information about plastic, but has this incident, this narrative that the information hangs on. And that's quite a clever way of trying to engage its reader. It certainly sounds like a compelling scenario. This ship 27 years ago that crashed with these items floating around the sea. But this isn't the only aspect of the book. It also talks more about day-to-day items, day-to-day examples of plastic as well, right?
Right, yeah. So the book is full of great examples. There's all sorts of different aspects of how plastic exists in the world that it looks at. So to go with the sort of different things that it talks about, we have different styles of text and illustration layouts on different pages, and they're sort of combined for different goals and different purposes. So for example, there's a double-page spread, so 2 full pages of the book has like a cross-section of a house, of a typical family home with all the rooms visible, and then we have various items that are labelled in the different rooms in the house. So things that you might have expected, like plastic bags, and then other things which maybe we don't think about as containing plastic so often, like shower curtains or keyboards or aprons or whatever it is. And along with the text, the style of illustration, it works very well to convey a very clear understanding of the multiple locations that we might find plastic in our home environment.
Right.
And the design and layout like that are excellent throughout the book. So there's another double-page spread, and this one explains that most plastic is made from petroleum, a substance called naphtha, a substance which is extracted from petroleum, is used to create various types of plastics. And the illustration that they use to show this, again, it's very clear, it's very simple, the images are very appealing, and it describes this process visually. It sort of charts it, the different stages across the pages, but it's very easy to understand and comprehend when you see it laid out like that. You really get this like a three-dimensional sense of the substance. It feels very tangible, and there's lots more examples that we could point to. One more that particularly struck me was there's a section about plastic use in healthcare, and there's a diagram of a human body, and then it highlights the various types of plastics that are used in related healthcare issues. So things like artificial corneas or ear implants or dentures or even artificial knee joints. And again, it's just very simple, very clear, and very effective.
Right. So it's not just about the bad things, but also some of the good uses of plastic highlighted there, right?
Right.
I mean, just talking about that highlights how far and wide plastic is used in our everyday lives. I think that that cross-section of the house really gets you thinking about where plastic is. I mean, even looking around this room, like we see bits of plastic everywhere, like buttons and knobs and things. And even on my shirt, my buttons are made out of plastic.
Right.
Everywhere we look. But then this book lays out these things, but the target of this book is still children, though, right? I mean, how effective do you think this book is in engaging those young readers, and do you think it'll work?
Well, like you mentioned, I wish I had something like this when I was a child, because one of the strongest points of the book is that it's very good at explaining these often very difficult concepts in a way that's easy to digest. And so, it talks about very different and, very complicated ideas, like how, plastic is created from petroleum, and the life cycle of plastic, and how the system that disperses plastic around different places around the planet, and why that happens, and why it accumulates in different parts of the world, and then it talks about the difficulty in tackling that issue, and how it breaks down, and it can enter the bodies of animals, and can even these tiny little microplastics can enter our food system. So it talks about very, very complicated things, and it tackles these very big ideas, but it does so with clarity and with intelligence, and the whole thing's beautifully designed and presented, the text, the illustration, and the translation, and I think really we have to celebrate everybody who was involved in creating it.
Right, yeah, so as Barry, you've brought the book in with you, and I've had a look at it, and I think it's exactly the kind of book that should be in every school library all over the world, really. It's very engaging, very informative, and beautiful to look at. It's called Plastic, Past, Present and Future, and it's written by Kim Eun-ju. Barry, once again, thank you for introducing us to this work, and we look forward to the next Korea Book Club.
Okay, take care.
You're now listening to Korea 24 on KBS World Radio. If you ever missed an episode of Korea 24, you can always catch up by downloading our podcast. Simply search for the KBS World Radio app wherever you get your applications from. After downloading the app, select the menu icon in the top left-hand corner. A drop-down menu will then appear from where you can select podcasts, then programs, then Korea 24. There, you'll find a list of all our previous episodes for you to download and enjoy on your own time. And don't forget to follow our Twitter page at KBS Korea 24 to get the latest updates on our show every day.
We're now approaching the end of our show, which means it's time to bring in our staff editor, Albert Kim, for our regular morning edition preview segment. This is, of course, where we look at some stories coming out in tomorrow's newspapers, namely the Korea Herald and the Korea Times, who have been kind enough to give us previews of their papers for tomorrow. Albert, it's good to see you again.
It's good to be here.
So what stories have you got for us today?
So the first story today is from Kang Seung-woo at the Korea Times. Now, Kang writes about how the chief of Seoul City's tourism and sports believes that a walking tour program can be the answer to meet the growing demand of tourists coming into the capital.
Oh, interesting. Walking tours. They do say walking is the best way to see a city. Can you give us more information about this program?
Sure. So according to the article, this whole guided walking tour is a free program offered by the government, which is tailored to both foreign and domestic tourists who want to see all that the capital has to offer on foot. Now, this program was launched way back in 2003 and has established itself as one of the city's most important tourist programs. There are over 35 courses available, including 4 that were just added. So each tour lasts from 2 to 3 hours, and reservations have to be made online at least 3 days in advance on the Visit Seoul website, so you have to really plan ahead.
Right.
You can reserve tours for both individuals and groups.
You have to plan ahead, but it's free, so, why not, This program seems to be in high demand then.
Absolutely. So Kang says that last year, nearly 150,000 Koreans and foreigners took part in the program. Now, the Director General of Tourism and Sports at the city government told the Korea Times that the program offers people multiple options from palaces to villages and popular streets. Also, the walking tours are run under the expert hands of multilingual guides, and each guide has an extensive knowledge of the history and culture of the capital.
Right, it's always great to have someone showing you around the city in your own native tongue. What languages are available?
So there are currently 205 guides who can speak English, Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, Thai, and even Malay Indonesian, not a language I speak. But although Chinese tourists were the largest group of inbound tourists in Korea last year, the Korea Tourism Organization did say that the walking tours were actually most popular among visitors from Taiwan.
Oh, interesting.
The United States followed in second place, while Japan came in third and China in fourth.
As I said, to see a city, I think walking is one of the best ways to do it. You get to lay the land, you get to see regular people, and if you ride the subways, you miss some of the sights riding a subway, even though whole subways are pretty awesome as well. But the problem with these walking tours is you'll only be able to experience one area because there's only so much you can see in a couple of hours, whereas if you do a bus tour or something like that, then you get to see more of the city. But if you have time in the city, more than just a day or two, then why not?
It's a good way to get exercise, I think, as well.
Yes, of course, as well. You stay fit. So what were some of the most popular destinations that people went to for these walking tours?
This one's really interesting. One of the most popular locations was the War Memorial of Korea. So due to the current security situation on the Korean Peninsula, and with the denuclearization talks between Washington and Pyongyang about to resume, it kind of does make sense for there to be heightened interest in the memorial. And I've passed by it many times on my way to Itaewon, and it certainly is a majestic place that I would recommend to visit to learn about the history of the peninsula.
Yes, definitely. So all sorts of walking tours available, 35 courses available, and then hopefully going on the Visit Seoul website to book in advance, though. Let's move on now to our second story. What do you have for us?
So our last story is courtesy of Ya Jun-suk at the Korea Herald, and Ya talks about how global e-scooter companies are making their way to South Korea. So according to the article, these companies are entering the country's micro-mobility market and thus intensifying competition in the industry. So if any of our listeners have been in the capital recently, these days you can find a lot of scooters on the street that you can rent via your mobile phone.
Right. Have you tried them?
I have, and I have to say they're very fun, but it's easy to get carried away, especially with speed and just darting through traffic. So you have to be careful.
Yes, I've tried them as well. I think they're a great way to get around in smaller distances, rather than spending more money on like a taxi or something like that. These overseas companies, though, they're trying to come here and find success then.
Yes. So the article mentions one American company, and what they've been doing is they've been recruiting local Korean employees since earlier this year to prepare for their launch on October 1st. Now, according to the Korea Transport Institute, around 300,000 mobility vehicles will be available in the country for sharing by 2022. So as a result, the market volume of the industry will hit around $600 million by that time. Now, if this company that I mentioned launches their services here, there will be just only 3 global e-scooter companies with operations in the country.
Right, but as you said, there are safety concerns, aren't there?
Yes, and the American company I mentioned had a customer in New Zealand die earlier this year after he was involved in an accident, but authorities determined that the scooter was not to blame. However, a recent study published in a New Zealand medical journal, it showed that e-scooter riders are arriving at hospitals with injuries we see in car accidents or falls from heights. So as part of efforts to address these safety concerns, the company says it gave away around 250,000 helmets to their riders, but I think what they should do, in my opinion, is just provide helmets on all of their scooters for everyone to use.
I understand, but no one's really going to use a helmet for scooters. The whole point of the scooters is that you just get on them very easily. It's very easy to pick up and ride, and therefore it gives access to everyone. But I definitely do believe safety is a concern. Perhaps I think more training needs to be involved with these kind of e-scooters. I've heard of all sorts of accidents happening in Korea as well. This is definitely a concern and something that needs more done about it anyway. That's where we're going to end our Morning Edition preview segment, though, Albert. So we'll speak to you again tomorrow, and have a good day.
Thank you.
That's where we end the show. Just before we go, a quick reminder that you can listen to Korea 24 live on our website or on one of our apps at KBS Kong, KBS World Radio, and KBS World Radio on air. You can also download all our old shows as a podcast, which you can find on the website and many other popular podcast apps. Thank you for staying with us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with our Thursday edition of Korea 24, featuring our travel and culture corner, as well as all the day's top headlines and news analysis. I've been your host, Kwon Jang-ho. Until next time, goodbye.
World Radio strives to promptly update our listeners on safety procedures during emergency situations. The following are recommended guidelines to follow in case of forest fires. Before hiking, ensure the mountain trail is safe and does not have restricted entry. Make sure you aren't carrying flammable items such as matches and cigarettes. Only cook or light a campfire in permitted areas. If a fire must be lit in an area adjacent to a forest zone, obtain permission from relevant authorities beforehand and take special caution so that the fire does not spread. To prevent small fires from spreading, use your coat or jacket to put it out. If you need to evacuate, move to roads or rocky spots without traces of fuel. If you do not have enough time to evacuate, move to a spot with less fuel, leaves or branches. Scrape away the flammable material, cover your face and wait until the flames pass. If you witness or have any information on forest fires, contact police or forest authorities immediately. You can dial 119 for emergency services. Please check our website at world.kbs.co.kr for up-to-date information and procedures.